Hello. So, yesterday, for me, because I'm doing this on the 20th, I put live the long patrol on Sisters, the pairs of battleships. Well, Nelson and Rodney, Renown and Repulse. And I'm going to do more looks at Sisters, and if you want to keep suggesting different pairs of Sisters you would like to see included in the video discussion and compared and contrasted, I'm more than happy to keep that up as sort of an ongoing series. But combined with the live, it has started a lively discussion on Discord, especially, but also in the YouTube comments and Twitter and in DMs and WhatsApp. Thank you, Dan Freeman. On the realities of what would the options have been if the RN had gone with the choices of somehow the treaty system, saying, right, then we'll give up all our 13.5-inch ships, perhaps even including HMS Tiger. In return, we get to build a new class of ships. Now, the thing is, there is some provisos which come with that. If giving up Tiger, they're giving up their 4th fast ship. Queen Elizabeth class are all roughly 24, 25 knots in practice. Rest of their battleships are 21 knots, roughly. They will want, they need another fast ship to guarantee the availability of 2. Because if you remember the rule I always go through is, 1 is a white elephant. We have a capability when it's available. 2 is we usually have a capability, but if anything happens to it or either of them, we are down to ouch. 3 is you have the capability constantly available. 4, you constantly have the capability at sea. 5, you constantly have the capability available plus surge capacity. So you first have to think about, right then, so if they are now losing even more ships, and if we go to the slideshow where I discussed this, it's the wrong slideshow. It's always fun when that happens. And as you can see on this treaty, the RN is losing 4 of its 13.5-inch ships, and it's gaining 2. Now, whilst it's also officially supposed to have 525,000 tons limit, they're actually saying that by 1930, etc., the Royal Navy is allowed to have 558,950 tons, which is more than the USN is allowed to have. There is some interesting diplomacy going on here. There is some very interesting diplomacy going on here. Which leads me to this question. How many? If the RN does manage to get all the 13.5-inch ships, how many does it get? Well, here is the question. If they are stuck to the 525,000 ton limit, which is possibly where they would be, they get 5. If it's 558,950 tons, they're allowed 6. Now, under what circumstances would this be allowed? Well, pound for pound, it is a reduction in the Royal Navy's total ship count. In fact, it's a reduction of 9 ships down to 6 at most, or possibly 5. So you're losing 4 ships overall, which the US Navy and the Japanese Navy might find quite attractive for the Royal Navy, because that's 4 less places they can be at a time. I.e., in force generation terms, that's 1 with possibly 2 less ships they'd have to face in actual numbers of things they'd have to kill. It does give the Royal Navy far more capability, especially as we're getting into it. But I think there is a way that it could have happened. I do think this could have been a possibility, because the RN does get 2. The question is, I think potentially it's limited to 2 because of the factor that it goes into it is, it's the 2 for 70,000 tons and getting to the 558,950 tons. Whereas I think if they ask for more, and said more. Either the US Navy would have wanted to complete another 16-inch ship, and the Japanese Navy would have done. Maybe they adjusted tonnage figures overall, but most likely the RN is told it has to agree to go down to 525,000 tons. Then it becomes an interesting question. Do they go for all battleships? Do they go for a fast battleship design, or do they go for a mixed battlecruiser and battleship force to procure? Because remember, they're now losing one of their fast ships. They have got 4 fast ships on this list, and they're all together. Hood, Renown, Repulse, Tiger. They're their 4 fast ships. I think, myself, what the RN would go for would be a 28-knot design NelRod. Honestly, I think they would go through the G3s and they'd work out, I think, for roughly 35,000 tons, 16-inch guns, 28 knots. And there is a factor, and I'll explain this as we get into it and when I'm putting the ship together, into why this is the case. But now, I need to turn off the slides, and I need to turn on the game auto detect, because I need to show you something in the joyous thing that is Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. And if I do any more advertising for them, it's going to be like Bloomin' Iron Brew. I'm just giving them a load of free advertisement. But Spring Sharp and my laptop and XSplit are not happy bunnies when I use them. And so UAD, you lovely thing, you work. So that is what we do. Enjoy. So, here is my NelRod. Now, as you can see, due to game mechanics and me trying to keep it to roughly 38,400 tons fully loaded, because they're actually 38,390 tons fully loaded, and this is 38,398. So I am sorry, the designers of Nelson and Rodney were better than I. They managed to get it a lot better than I could. I do apologize. But, as you can see, to do that, I have cheated, shamelessly. She still technically has a 3-turret, 6-inch broadside. But she has 9 guns instead of 6 guns for each side on the secondary mount, which is an improvement. But she just has 3 of them up the stern because that was all I could fit. And I may have played around with the turret formation to make it slightly better in terms of my proposed improvements. You could probably get the twins in, and if you put the 4 turrets back the way they intended to be. Well, they built them as. But I've gone with the F3 design because we're going for 28 knots. As you can see, she's 1.1 knots. And I have a little battle for you because, well, seeing her like this isn't really much of a help. Now, what I will tell you about her opponent is that they can do 30 knots. And I picked as the model for the opponent, because remember, this takes place in the 1920s to get the G3 N3 hull in the correct timeline for Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. It's modelled on a certain opponent, but it isn't really that opponent in full. But I hope you enjoyed. And basically, it's a test of how many of these ships do you think we need. They are slightly less armoured and therefore slightly less able to take the bashing as Nelson and Rodney, but you'd have had more of them. For example, I have Nelson and Canada. Oh, Canada. Yes, I know. She'd have actually had an admiral's name, but you know what? As Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts go, that's pretty nice of them to pick for Canada because they'll seem to realise that I have quite so many Canadian subscribers, and I have so much fun chatting with the Canadian subscribers on my channel. Now, this is going to be interesting. We'll see. You're going to get your first sight of the opponent. And yes, I have been doing work to develop this opponent and make sure they look accurately like one of Nelson and Rodney's most famous and feared opponents. Let's see, will you recognize her from this design? Yes, it is an enemy warship. Yes, it's got 8 guns, 15-inch guns, and it's against 18 16-inch guns. So, well, life is either going to be very good or very short for this vessel. But back to my division. Hello, Nelson. Hello, Canada. Please don't get in 6-inch gun range. And because of my recent experience with the variations on HMS Tiger, no, these ships are not fitted with torpedoes. I want them to keep well out of the idea of getting into torpedo range. Both sets seem to be having fun aiming at each other. Her hit chance at this range is currently 100%, which is good. Oh, she does look good like this. I mean, she looks really good. And the enemy battleship does have the speed advantage on them. That I have been accurate this one. I thought the maximum they go for is 28 knots, and I very kindly gave our German counterpart a speed of 30 knots. So they've got a 2-knot advantage. How they use that 2-knot advantage is to be seen, because it's 2 knots advantage, but honestly, they should be using that to try and get away. But maybe they just decide they want to go in for the kill, or maybe they have no choice. Who knows? It's being identified. 72%. 73%. It'll get higher. I do enjoy this game. Again, my plan is once I've got my tower working, etc., I will try and start to do Spring Sharp as well as your Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, because I realise some of you feel that Spring Sharp is better. Because it doesn't work that well in my setup with my laptop and XSplit, I haven't been using it that much often, so UAD is the better one for me at the moment because of it works. But we will see. We will see. Tower procurement is going to be after the trip to Canada, though, now. Speaking of Canada, let's go check on her. How is she doing? Neither of you have been hit. Ooh! Nelson has just got hit. Yeah! That was annoying, but not really that problematic. Let's go find out who your opponent is. That should be about now. It's definitely about. Let's go. What battleship are you? This is this is the one thing I really, really do like about this game. It's very close to real life in that your opponent is somewhere almost over the horizon. You have no idea where, other than for a plume of smoke. And look at us, we're just slowly going there. It's the Bismarck. Oh my, I'm so surprised. I didn't set that one up. But I thought it's appropriate. So this is our Battle of the Denmark Straits. And the idea is if you had more of the Nelson and Rodneys, and they were therefore slightly less, well, still precious. But let's put it this way. If I have 2, I'm going to pick armor over speed. If I have 4 or 5, or maybe even 6, I'm losing HMS Tiger, I'm probably going to think, well, I don't want to make a super fast battleship or a battle cruiser. I don't want to all those times. But if I make one class and I make them all roughly 28 knots, then I have a fast battle line, especially If I then do engine upgrades to the Queen Elizabeth class, and at that point, I end up with maybe 10 battleships which can all do 28 knots. 10 battleships which can do 28 knots becomes a very scary force. Yes, someone can build a 30-knot battleship, but I have 10 28-knot battleships. The fact is, you always have to be going, therefore, at maximum speed to be able to keep out of range of them, which is going to shorten your radius of operations dramatically. Because ships do not cruise everywhere at top speed. They have their cruising speed. Now, there would be problems if you had a 28-knot speed, a 28-knot battle line made up of mostly Queen Elizabeths and these NelRods, and you had then 3 battle cruisers, Renown, Repulse, and Hood. Well, they're lovely, but what are you going to do with the R-Class? Well, the R-Class, again, will still be your first candidates for replacement, probably. But they also still have a role in that they would automatically become the ships which would be... Ouch! I don't think 16-inch guns is a good combination for poor Bismarck to face. This is turning out rather realistic to real life. Despite her having higher speed, the fact is, if she's actually going to, she should be using that speed to get away, which is the one thing where this game doesn't really, accurate, because she's not running away. But, yeah, even slightly reduced armor, and when I say slightly reduced armor, the main belt is still 13.8 inches, I think, on these ships. Or did I keep it at 14? Did I manage to keep it at 14? Might have kept it at 14. I'll check that after this is over, because I was playing around that. But yeah, compartmentalized, very heavily armored, and currently very capable of bashing away. And yeah, I don't think somehow Bismarck is going to get a kill today. And I should also point out that I may or may not have dramatically reduced the conning tower width on my Nelson design to get it in underneath the weight limit. So the fact is, neither of them seem to have lost their captains, but poor Bismarck, which did have what I estimated its conning tower be, because basically I used its belt armor as its likely fitness for conning tower armor, doesn't seem to have done as well. Ultimately, this is a fairly decent design. And I think the treble 6 inches are frankly gorgeous. And as said, it reduces the number of turrets by 50%. So I was actually tempted to play around with the weight figures a bit more and see how many, single 5-inch guns I could put in to represent the 4.7-inch AAs. Because I think you could get a few on if you did this as this design. But yes, Nelson seems to be doing fine. Oh, Canada. Wow, you're doing very well. You're just steaming along going, this is a walk in the park. He's actually hit me? Goodness gracious me. But I'm the beautiful lady Canada. Why are you actually shooting at me? Why would you want to hurt me? I'm just a happy little 16-inch battleship, just coming along out for some fun. What? Oh, there it is. Hello, Bismarck. Well, you appear to be having some issues. I feel like I should say sorry about now. In the defense of Bismarck, I built it as accurately as I could for 1920s German technology on UAD. Apparently, if you are facing double your number though of equivalent guns, it can do damage to you quite quickly. And that's ultimately the point here. The Royal Navy with Nelson and Rodney, they are their two bastions. You know, Churchill describes them as the bulwarks, the bastions of the battle line that would anchor it at either end with these indomitable fortresses of the sea, in the full Churchillian phraseology, which is a lovely thing. But that's the trouble, is if you only have two of them. And the Royal Navy did know this, and there are some very interesting discussions going on. It's very much quickly apparent when you start to read through discussions that the politicians would accept only two. The Royal Navy wanted more than two. So basically, this is the reality of, if the Royal Navy gets allowed to build more than two, does it get allowed to build three? Does it get allowed to build four? Does it get allowed to build five? I have shown you a table with the stats, and we'll be discussing that again before this is over, the stats of what it equates to in 35,000-ton ships. The thing is, the class you then design is going to be slightly different than the class you built. Because as good as Nelson and Rodney are built, they're what you build if you only get two ships. Give the AI back control, or was the AI not even in control? I'm not sure. Were you guys just following my instructions? I don't know. Was I managing to keep you out of torpedo range? But that's the point. If you're only building two ships, they're going to be armoured to the nth degree, because that's the critical thing. Survivability of those two ships. You've got two Fabergé eggs. They are massively impressive, very beautiful, very powerful, but they are incredibly delicate, and you're going to look after them because you've only got two. But if you've got, I don't know, half a dozen very nice looking large chicken eggs, well, you might use a couple to make an omelette. You get an omelette out of it, which is a satisfying meal, and you're not upset that you just lost those two eggs. You've still got four more. You can paint them. You can, if you want to, drain them and paint them and have a painted, well, mine actually got made into a Nelson, an egg, a General Custard. Well, I thought it was fine. I thought egg being custard and all sorts of things. This was when I was a young boy at primary school, and it was a project. We had to do one. Me being me, I made about, well, four. Principally because I thought, well, what happens if I break one going in? Then I'm going to get 0 for this. It's not exactly that difficult to drain and paint an egg. I might as well do more than one. It worked. So there is a difference in approach if you're building more than two. It's part of the whole discussion I keep harping on about you're building a fleet, not you're building a ship. When a navy is building when a navy is looking at making its order of procurement, it's not looking at what is this individual ship going to give me. It's looking at what is the capability I want, and how do I generate that capability. Which is where you get into all the discussions currently going on. You know, for many years, it's been looked at smaller and smaller and smaller amphibious forces, etc., and deployment of forces, and we're deploying penny packets of troops because we're dealing with bush wars and counterinsurgency and all those things. And now, of course, we've got the Russians and the Chinese acting up, and it's going to take a while before people start to realize, hang on, yes, you can get away with deploying a small number of troops to dealing with a local insurgency who are not probably going to be properly trained. But if you're dealing with a slightly more proficient force, you're probably going to want an entire battle group. You're probably going to want something which is more than a battalion of US Marines or a squadron of Royal Marines. You're going to want them to have things added onto them, maybe some tanks, maybe some heavy armor of some kind, possibly some artillery, possibly all sorts of things. You're going to want to consider what they have. And the thing is, the larger ships, which are more expensive and you can probably buy fewer of because your budget is probably not going to be expanded, become far more useful because they can deploy the larger number. But they won't allow you to be in as many places at once, which is why you tend to look at the smaller ships. Because if you need to deploy penny packets of troops out lots of places, you need lots of them to be in lots of places. It's balancing that, and it's the same with Nelson and Rodney. They are built the way they are, and so therefore aren't the world's first fast battleships, because there are only two of them. In which case, well, it might take them slightly longer to get to you, but you're still going to get dead when they reach you. And the thing is, they're going to survive it. Whereas if you are building 6, well then, 28 knots. You've already done the maths for Queen Elizabeth class. You've done the maths for all sorts of other ships on this hull type. You know exactly how much horsepower you need. In real life, Nelson and Rodney get 45,000 shaft horsepower and 8 Admiralty drum boilers to deploy over 2 shafts and 2 geared steam turbines. If you decided to use a little less armor, maybe rearrange the space a bit, you could probably get it up to 12 free drum boilers, 3 geared turbines, 3 shafts with minimal efforts, which is what I've done. These ships are 3 shaft ships. They're not 4 shaft, like the Royal Navy tend to prefer. No, I saved weight, I put in just a 3rd shaft. And now they can deploy the horsepower, and now they can deploy that steam. Still got a single funnel. Induced draft boilers, not forced draft. And look at them. Yes, this is simulation. But the thing is, I would only make the decision to make ships like this if I can build more than 2. Probably if I can build more than 3. If I can only build 3, I'm still tempted to go down the Nelson Rodney route of the armor. But the moment I've got 4, well, they aren't so special then. They are still critical, but they aren't as unique in my force. 5, I can do this. 6, yeah, hey. And also, then you have to think about the second order effects on British industry. And that is the way, if you're building 6 NelRods in the 1920s, that's going to have a massive effect on keeping shipyards going and keeping the armor industry going, because that's several thousand tons of armor. Yes, there will probably still be depression and all those things, but the capital ships won't get cancelled, especially if they're past the treaty limits. And considering how many people they employ through the supply trains, I am very impressed by Bismarck's absolutely still being afloat. This is going to sound terrible, but I have practiced this earlier and gone through this just in case this was going to lead to a surprise, as with Tiger, which wasn't really such a surprise. Fricking torpedo. But yeah. And it was a lot quicker. So the AI is either getting smarter on me, or the few tweaks I did to Bismarck's design have really improved it. Because I have tweaked the design a bit. There is a reason she's 50,000 tons. She's a 1920s version of Bismarck design, but with some... I wasn't going to be cruel and make her too weak an opponent for my NelRods. Mainly because, oh, Canada likes a proper opponent. She really does. She feels, Nelson gets upset when they don't fight her, but Canada just gets upset if she feels it's unfair. I did go through one simulation earlier when I put them up against a single French cruiser, and I swear Canada didn't fire her guns once. Wouldn't do it. Just felt that ship was just not worthy of being fired upon by her mighty 16-inch guns. Nelson mashed it up. I mean, seriously, Nelson was a little obsessive, but, you know, Canada was a real lady about it. Ooh, that ship hasn't moved in a while now, has it? The Bismarck is not in a good time. The trouble is, once you stop moving, this is the real point. The entire system is designed around dealing with a moving target, firing at a moving target from a moving ship using visual identification. The moment you have a scenario where your opponent is barely moving, well, yeah, it doesn't bode well. I think that's the flag up for sinking. I'm not sure whether to bring them in close because Bismarck does, in true to form, Bismarck doesn't have torpedoes. They don't either. The Nelson Rodney do not have torpedoes. Okay, I'm just gonna finish this off. Canada's probably gonna stop firing on me in a second because she's just gonna go, no, I refuse to kill a wounded animal. You know, that's not my style. I am Lady Canada. If my opponent is not able to do anything, I will not fire at them. I am Muhammad Ali not giving the hit to Foreman as he goes down because it just lacks grace. Oh. Poor Bismarck. Let's check Nelson. They're also flying a flag. But you appear to be, well, I suppose unit commander, but you appear to have done pretty darn well. That's this is the other problem for Bismarck in this scenario, because in this scenario, Bismarck now can't really bring its full weight of fire to bear, whereas Nelson and Canada can. Again, they couldn't in the traditional NelRod arrangement, but you pick the traditional NelRod arrangement when you're trying to maximize everything for armor. Whereas for Nelson, for my design, well, yep, they can all fire forward. That would be really evil, but that is what I'm going to do. Yes, I'm going to pass in front of the Bismarck, blasting away at it. Although I don't think it's going to actually be afloat for much longer. Structural 9%. It's now being sort of protected by the water to an extent. I don't know. But no, it's, and this goes back to the sort of scenario because I built Bismarck as she was built. But again, if the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, the Reichsmarine, is facing a world where the Royal Navy has a fast battle line of 28-knot battleships, whether they are upgraded, modernized Queen Elizabeths, or NelRods, the super NelRod, and 3 battle cruisers, then to an extent, at what point do the Germans go, is 30 knots enough? Is 30 knots enough for their battleships to be able to survive? Probably not. They're probably going to have to push up, which is going to have to make them think again about displacement, about armor, about all the things they need to put in them. If you want to see the world change, you start thinking through what happens if the Royal Navy gets more than 2 NelRods. It's going to change the Royal Navy's approach to carriers. They're going to need to be faster. It's going to change the Royal Navy's approach to the battle line, because that's going to be faster. It's probably going to change the US Navy's approach to its battle line, because its battle line is going to be very far behind the RN's battle line. Yes, they can keep up the R-class, but the R-class aren't going to be the things that worry them. The R-class are just not going to be the things that worry them. Oh, it was a 12-inch main belt. So, yeah, that was actually down. That's actually less than an R-class. But pretty much no impact. Oh well. Fun times. This again is the question. How many does the RN get? If you put it as a conservative estimate, it's 5. That does get them to fairly close to 525,000 tons. If you use 35,000 tons as your limiting. Again, Nelson and Rodney, well, they were 33,000 tons. As I said, 33,800 tons in standard, 38,390 tons in full load. So, theoretically, they have an extra 1,200 tons to play with. Anyway, to put them in as under the 35,000 ton bracket. These ships are good ships. Nelson Rodney are good ships, but the trouble is when they're a pair, when it's a pair of ships you have which are a capability, you have a problem. When it's a pair of ships, they are all you have. And you lose one, you're down to pretty much no capability. You have more than a pair, and this is what's agreed at Washington. This figure is the 2. There's your Nelson and Rodney. It's what the politicians are happy with. But this figure, either of these 2 figures, would have made the Royal Navy ecstatic. Think about it. The Royal Navy's battle line would have been 5 R-class, 5 Queens, 5 NelRods, then a fast squadron of Renown, Repulse, and Hood. You make them 28-knot ships, and you modernize the Queens up to 28-knot ships, you've got a very fast battle line. You've got a very scary battle line. Admittedly, at that point, I don't see the R-class battleships getting much in the way of upgrading at all. I think all the effort's going to the Queens, because you can make them fast enough to upgrade your whole battle line. And then, when you're going to replacing the R's, whatever you replace them with also has to be 28-knot plus ships. Which, again, is not hard. The KGV class, their top speed is 28 knots. It's not absurdly anti-conservative for the RN to go for a 28-knot ship. It's quite on the money for the RN. It's not what they're going to do with 2 ships, because with 2 ships, those ships become precious jewels they have to protect. But if they had a class, 28 knots becomes it. And if you go through the various actions and various operations of the interwar period, or even the war period, if you start to think of an RM battle line which is composed largely around the NelRods and the Queens at 28 knots, you have a very interesting confluence of events. This is not what-if history. I don't want you thinking about that and thinking I'm approaching it as what-if history. I do what-if history, but this isn't. This is how we explain the Nelson and Rodney design and fit it in the pantheon of British design practice on battleships and the British design processes. Because there is a different approach to how you build a class of 2 ships, sisters, for a role, versus how you build a class of 6 ships, or 5. Again, you would be replacing battleships, but the important thing is you would also be replacing Tiger. And this is a lot of ships you'd be losing. So the RN, when they're looking at this, well, they've still got the 21 knot, 13.5-inch battleships. So again, it doesn't, Nelson Rodney fit in with that. The moment you have got rid of all of those, then suddenly your only 21 knot ships are your R class, which you built in the mindset of them being the cheap, cheerful secondary battleships to the Queen Elizabeth class in some respects. In that they would have the same battery and firepower as the Queens, but they wouldn't cost the same amount because they wouldn't have the same speed. Maybe you go with 25 knots, but I think you go with 28 knots. Because, yeah, Tiger's faster. Tiger can do 29 knots. But you're not going to worry too much. And you end up with the world's first fast battleships. And then you can modernize the Queen Elizabeth class up to 28 knots. You know that you can. With Warspite, we know they can. There is a good design which shows exactly that. We go into the next slide, and that works. Here you go. This is the upgrade of HMS Warspite. And as you can see, she goes for 6 Admiralty 3-drum boilers and converts another boiler room to a central store. But she has 8 boiler rooms by this point, because she's put in, well, she went from 4 boiler rooms, all lengthwise across the ship, to 6 of them, subdivided by a nice bulkhead going across, nice reinforced centerline bulkhead. Well, you could keep it going and you could just spin this around and add in another pair, and you've got 8. And that would get you to 28 knots. Now, why don't they do that? Because they don't need to. They don't have a pressing reason to at this point when they're doing these upgrades, because the battle line still has the R's in it. They are looking at the King George V's. The Queen Elizabeths are still faster than the R's. They don't need to go faster because you're not looking at. You've also got Nelson and Rodney, who are not as fast as they are. But if you have a Nelson and Rodney class, which is 28 knots, then Queen Elizabeth's, you'd also bump up to 28 knots, because then your fleet is a 28 knot line, a battle line. And that will change history. So there is the what if, the what might have been. But there's also the reason, because you don't have that, because you don't have the class, because you don't have the things you would want, you build Nelson and Rodney as they are. If you're only building a pair of ships and they're going to be your sole 16-inch big gun battleships, The status symbols, having the 16-inch battleship, the maximum gun you can get under treaty status. These are going to be your powerful ships. You have to make them as survivable as you can. It costs time. It costs money to build them. You're not going to therefore go, well, I'd really like them to be 28 knots because that'll give them speed and they'll be the world's first fast battleships. But we're going to have two. So everyone else will be designing their battleships to deal with your being 28 knot speed, and you're only going to have two. If you have six, well then, even a five. And that gives you 18 capital ships. 5 NelRods, 5 Queen Elizabeths, 5 R's, Renown, Repulse, and Hood. You probably at that point, it's going to sound strange, form up into 3 battle squadrons, each one made around a class of ships. Now the question is, where would you put them? Nelson and Rodney traditionally sit at home. But that's because the RN only has 2. I think you possibly see that spin around. You'd want those ships, those modern ships, to be your alert force going into the Mediterranean. So I think you would end up with your going into the Far East. So I think you would end up with the Nelson and Rodney, the NelRod squadron, being based in the Mediterranean. And I think you'd have the Queen Elizabeths based down the Atlantic Fleet, because they could act as reinforcement in the Mediterranean if you needed to move the NelRods to the Far East, or they could quickly surge through from home to the Far East. And the R's would be definitely the Atlantic Fleet and third stage reinforcements. Battlecruiser squadron? They're probably going to be staying the same deployments they did, wandering around the world occasionally, but mostly being based on the Atlantic Fleet. Which makes sense. The really interesting question is, if you have such a fast, and your plans are for such a fast battle line, what does this do to your carriers? But that's an entire other discussion. So, I hope you found this interesting. This is the 3rd Friday video I've recorded in 2 days, so this is a few Fridays in advance. You're going to be getting this probably well into March, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Take care, and enjoy.